Hello, I'm Katie Kammler, MU Extension Horticulture Specialist.
And I'm Juan Cabrera, Field Specialist in Horticulture for MU. And today we're going to talk about how to prevent your pests from developing resistance by rotating your pesticides. So naturally, any microorganism is going to develop resistance to any harsh environmental conditions. By chance, microorganisms will be exposed by harsh conditions in the environment, and these conditions will cause their DNA to mutate, or it will kill all susceptible individuals, leaving the resistant ones behind. In nature, this process may take several years to happen. However, when we apply pesticides, we increase the risk of this process being accelerated. Let's imagine that all these dots represent a population of insects or any disease or pathogens. And if you look there, we have two colors. We have the orange ones and we have the blue ones. The orange ones are the ones that are susceptible to any pesticide that we're using. And the blue ones are the ones that are resistant to those pesticides. So we have the susceptible and the resistant one. Notice that the majority of the individuals are going to be susceptible to any pesticides, while we will only have a couple of them that will be resistant to that pesticide. So why only a minority of them will be resistant to a pesticide? Well, it is a trade-off game. They may have a mutation that tells their body to develop the resistance to a specific molecule or chemical at the expense of other traits that are favorable under normal conditions. Let's say, for example, cicadas, you have the susceptible one. Under normal conditions, the male cicada will have a higher chance of mating and reproducing if they emit louder sounds. Now, this is just an example. I'm not saying that this is what happens in real life. This is just an example to illustrate how this process works. So the normal susceptible cicada, they emit louder sounds, and this means that these cicadas are gonna be able to mate with the females and then reproduce. Now we have the resistant cicada, the one that's resistant to whatever chemical we're using. This cicada is dedicating part of their resources and energy to develop that resistant molecule, and that means that this cicada is not gonna develop as well as the susceptible one. What that means is that this cicada is going to have a lesser chance of reproducing because it's not going to be so attractive under normal circumstances or conditions. So what happens when we expose this population to higher pressure under non-normal conditions? Let's say we apply pesticides. When we apply pesticides, what happens is that we will kill most of the susceptible cicadas. And if we keep applying, that means that the resistant variety is going to be the one left behind. So this increases the chance of this resistant variety of mating and reproducing. And that means that the next generation is going to have a higher chance of having the resistance genes to those pesticides. Now, this is what will happen if we encounter this population again after we apply the pesticide and then we apply the same pesticide again. What happens is that we're only going to kill the ones that are susceptible, but notice that the population is still high. We're not able to have a good control when using the same pesticide. And we're giving the resistant individual the chance to mate and reproduce again. So what happens is that if we keep using the same pesticide, this resistant variety is just going to keep reproducing, and we're going to have less control over these populations. And we're just going to get rid of the susceptible ones. So how do we prevent this from happening? Well, you rotate the pesticides or the mode of action that you're using, because it is very uncommon for an individual to develop multiple mutations that will grant them resistance to multiple chemical options. Let's say, for example, we spray with one kind of pesticide, we will get rid of most of the susceptible individuals. But then if we change the chemistry and the mode of action of this pesticide with another one, we'll increase our chances of even getting rid of the resistant one alongside the susceptible ones. And if we use another pesticide, then we'll be able to effectively control these pests without having the risk of developing resistant populations that we will not be able to control down the line. Now, Katie is going to give us an example on how to select fungicides or insecticides to prevent this resistance.
Thank you, Juan. We're going to talk about what we kind of call pesticide codes. And as Juan mentioned, all pesticides have what's called a mode of action. So fungicides, that's called a FRAC code. And in the the fruit and vegetable both, this applies to fruits and vegetables. We have a list of those codes in those books that kind of gives you an advice on what code they are. So it's easy at a glance to tell which ones are in different chemical classes that helps prevent resistance of that susceptible. So those pests are still susceptible to that. So fungicides, not only are they listed in, this is an example from the Midwest Fruit Pest Management Guide. The Vegetable Management Guide has charts like this. And if you are interested in FRAC codes in general, that's the website that is listed. For insecticides, it's called an IRAC code. And once again, there is a website that is all the IRAC codes, but the charts in the Fruit Production Guide make it simple to see in a chart form that they have a different number assigned to them and are part of a different code. Herbicides are a little different. They don't have a fancy name for it. It's typically just called a mode of action. And the chart in the Fruit Production Guide is a little different. It doesn't have a code number listed in this chart. However, all herbicides also have a code number, and that site for those is listed here. It's a little bit different because it is more geared toward field crops. So some of these you might not find in there, but a general rule of thumb is to look at the last part of the active ingredient there. Like the first one is, which I can't pronounce, but the last is flam. And then in the second one, it's nil and zin. So some of those, a lot of times the active ingredient, which is AI, is what AI stands for, that gives the chemical family to show some of what is different. And those chemical families do have different modes of action. Now, weeds are a little different because they can have multiple mode of action resistance. So in weeds, it's very important to switch up those herbicide modes of action to help prevent that, because some of our weeds are very prolific, and that's why they can develop resistance a lot faster than our insects and diseases.
So it is important, like Katie mentioned, that you will not rely on only one pesticide to control your pests. You had to have a nice group of pesticides that have different IRAC codes or FRAC codes so that you can rotate and make sure that they do not overlap. Any last word, Katie?
It's just having that arsenal at the ready in order to help prevent these pest problems and have a good harvest.